All right, guys, just want to welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick are in a 2024 preview and prediction for the Big 12 Conference. New look conference with a lot of new additions. We'll be doing our awards, our American team, and then we'll do the standings at the bottom part of the episode. Timestamps below if you'd like to skip around. Starting with those awards, looking at, Offensive Player of the Year. Clean sweep here. KJ Jefferson pairing up with Gal Malzahn at UCF. That's something we both agree on here. Next, we'll go ahead and go with Travis Hunter to be the Defensive Player of the Year. I'm going to go with Nick Martin, who was a stat sheet stuffer last year for the Pokes. We'll talk about him a little bit later on. Coach of the Year, I think Iowa State, Matt Campbell. These guys are big-time sleepers in this conference, and I think he'll do a great job. They'll give him those honors. That also includes Abu Sama being a breakout player of the year for them in the backfield, helping them, accomplish those goals. I think Dylan Edwards is a phenomenal addition for Kansas State. I think they're going to use him in a potential Deuce Vaughn type of role. I think he and DJ Giddens will be a great 1-2 punch. I'll go ahead and give him Newcomer of the Year. And then Caden Jenkins, one of a few young defensive backs that Baylor has that are probably going to break out this year. These are always fun to do, Nick, because there's a lot of variety and different things we can do with this. And I think in the Big 12 that's no different this year. There's a lot of guys that can fit the mold for all of these awards. How happy are you with the ones you came up with?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about the players I picked. Travis Hunter, I've always said that I believe he's more of a defensive player. Now, I've waxed on about this, said it a million times. I think he's better strong suit to play at cornerback than he is to play wide receiver. I like to see him make that more full-time role. I know at Colorado they're probably not going to do that, but I think the media attention plus a strong performance in that secondary this year will get Travis Hunter the opportunity to win that award this year. I think it'll be a deserved award if he has a really strong season. We saw flashes of his potential in the defensive side of the ball last year. I think Gus Malzahn and UCF will get close to making the Big 12 title game with this revamped offense led by KJ Jefferson. So I think they're going to get Coach of the Year. They're going to put together a really strong push late in the season and play in a high-value bowl game. I still think bowl games have value for some of these programs that are not close to the playoff. DeJon Stribling and Jacob Rodriguez, two players I picked for breakout players that had injury-riddled seasons last year. Stribling, I think he's a really fun, exciting player at Oklahoma State. Only played in 4 games last year, but in that 4 games, he had a really nice showing, scored a touchdown, caught some solid passes. I think he'll get a lot of targets this year. And then Rodriguez, a really physical, nice linebacker that looked good during his parts of 5 games last year. If he can stay fully healthy, I think he'll be a really strong, dominant linebacker in what is a weak linebacker room down there in Lubbock. For my newcomer, Will Shepard, comes over from the SEC. I know it's Vanderbilt, but he looked really good at Vanderbilt. He had a lot of nice flashes, playing on a very bad team, absolutely stood out, was the best player on a bad team. And now he transfers to Colorado, where he'll get a lot of targets. He'll be involved in the offense. They should put up a lot of points, especially early on in the season. You could see him get a ton of action. And then West Virginia, I'm excited about this team. I think Neil Brown has kind of figured it out down there in Morgantown. They have a big opportunity week 1 against Penn State, which I think is a game they could certainly compete in and potentially win that game. I picked that, and I'll pick that again later in the season. I think this is a fun team to watch that will be contending for the Big 12 title game with a really strong, high-power rushing offense, top 5 rushing unit in the country, plus a decent defense. I think can get them just over the line. I think these picks here are very interesting. I think we've both had a nice blend of different players, different coaches, different teams on here that we can discuss and go over.
Yeah, I certainly love Will Shepard. He was great at Vanderbilt. Big fan of his as well. Moving to the All-Conference Offense, and obviously Ollie Gordon was admitted as the Offensive Player of the Year. I think he'll have a great season. I just don't think he's going to be able to replicate the same production he had last year, even though he is going to be behind an offensive line that has unreal amount of experience, and that includes a first-teamer here in Dalton Cooper. This is a conference that has a lot of playmakers. Corey Kinner and Luke Condry, you're seeing running back and offensive line duos. I think Kinner and that O-line for the Bearcats is really going to be great this season. Brendan Presley was getting an ungodly amount of targets at the end of last year. So a lot of Oklahoma State players making this list, including 2 from that offensive line. Tetarola McMillan, he's one of the nation's top receivers. Pretty easy choice there. Brant Cooley at tight end, a forgotten guy, who will step up for the Utes as a great versatile pass catcher. And obviously the guy we have highlighted here, Wyatt Millum. You talked about the Mountaineers being a big-time sleeper team in this conference, Nick. And it's going to start with a guy like that who's considered probably the best left tackle in football. He's been elite in pass protection. I think this is a guy that certainly gets talked about a good amount, but certainly not enough playing in this conference and in Morgantown. I think, in terms of NFL draft boards, though, he's certainly going to be well equated there, and that's all that matters at the end of the day.
Millum caps off a fantastic offensive line here. We have in this first team all-conference offensive line that features 2 Oklahoma State players, and Cooper and McCleskey, who are really solid pieces, of course. Really strong offensive line play, and Stillwater's been a statement for Gundy throughout his tenure, and he wants to continue to do that in order to block for that star running back, Ollie Gordon, who they have over there. I do think Kadra and Servanian as well are 2 solid pieces for this offensive line. Ollie Gordon, he had 2,000 yards of total offense from scrimmage last year. Can he get back to that number? It's certainly possible. Do I think he'll get back to it? No, I expect a little bit of a dip in production, had some off-the-field issues, some distractions, and it's tough to repeat that. 2,000 yards of total offense is very tough to get to. I can certainly see why people are picking him to be the offensive player of the year, but you and I both went with KJ Jefferson just because I think it's hard to get back to that 2,000 number plateau that he got to last year. McMillan's a guy to keep an eye on, certainly if you want a sleeper pick potentially for offensive player of the year. It's hard to say sleeper when he's first team all-conference, but he's a guy that's going to get a lot of targets. Him and his buddy at quarterback, Noah Fafita, are two strong, exciting, fun players down there in Tucson. That's a guy you certainly want to keep an eye on, in my opinion, as a guy that's going to have a great season, get a lot of targets, and score a lot of touchdowns.
Looking at the defensive side of the ball, Tyler Beatty for BYU, a bright spot for what, might be a struggling defense this year. You see the Utes getting some additions here. Junior Tafuna is a great defensive tackle. Coming off somewhat of a disappointing season, he's proven his abilities to be elite. Karen Reed, tremendous player as well, that didn't certainly, have as many negative plays as you would have expected, but I think he's also going to get back to a nice groove. And there's obviously a very talented secondary group in this conference led by the aforementioned Travis Hunter. I think you could pick any of those guys over at Iowa State. I'm going to go ahead and go with Miles Purchase, though. I think he'll go ahead and step in as the CB1, and he'll make some big-time plays. And then Takario Davis from Arizona staying put in Tucson was a big-time return by Brett Brennan there. And then the highlight guy here, Nicholas Martin, a guy that was just phenomenal for the Pokes last year. 140 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 6 sacks and 2 interceptions. Stat sheet stuffer to the core, Nick. And, I talked about Ollie Gordon. It's going to be hard for him to replicate his production. For Martin, if he can stay on the field, I don't think it's going to be all that hard because they really need him to be the heart and soul of their football team. Oklahoma State on offense, they have some balance, some versatility. On defense, not so much. They're going to need this player to do that once again this year.
If you listen to a bunch of episodes here, you'll know I love rattling off those guys that absolutely stuff the stat sheet. I'm a big stats nerd, especially when it comes to tackles. I think tackles are an incredible stat to keep track of and a very important stat returning for your team. When you return 140 tackles of total tackles production there from Nicholas Martin, including 16 tackles for loss, that's an incredible returning production. It's really hard to find that value elsewhere on your team. Incredible returning value there. Martin is a very strong physical linebacker who I love a lot. I think he's a really incredible player. Reed at Utah, I think he's going to have a great season as well. I think he's a guy you're going to find in the backfield a lot, get those tackles for loss and sack numbers up, while Beatty and Junior Tafalu on the defensive line are two incredibly strong physical players, plus Lee Hunter, an underrated player at UCF that I think is in line for a good season. This secondary group I think is a fantastic group, highlighted by Purchase and Hunter. I think Hunter is a phenomenal player. You're going to get with him. Miles Purchase, an underrated player out of Iowa State, a really good physical ball hawking CB who can play really good defense, a solid defensive back. And then Kobe Bryant and Takario Davis as well are two strong players to round off this first team all-conference defense that has a nice blend of different players from different programs that are all physically strong and really dominant on their defenses.
Now moving to the standings predictions in this conference, obviously a lot of mumbo-jumbo at the top, really. It's all going to be unpredictable, I think, ultimately. Starting at the top for me, Utah at 10-2. Nick, you picked them to lose 4 games and not make it to the conference title game in Arlington. The thing we want to talk about here is probably the injuries with Utah last year. I mean, they were probably the most beat-up team in all of America. They were everywhere you looked. They were injured, and now they're getting back a strong, trio in Cam Rising, Micah Bernard, and Brant Kuthi. Rising and Kuthi were supposed to play against Florida. They were questionable for that game all summer long. They ended up not playing all year at all. So it was very concerning to see that happen. All this extended time, I think, is certainly positive for them. But that doesn't always guarantee you're going to be great. I think this is a second ACL tear for Rising. Kuthi's a veteran. So if these guys can return to the same players they were, then I think they can certainly dominate. And, obviously, they're incredibly physical when it comes to running the ball. It's always been a staple for them. This passing game is also very tough to slow down on third downs. Guys like Money Parks, Micah Pittman, who was also injured. Dorian Singer comes over. I love Damian Alford. I mean, they have a capable receiving core. Last year, they obviously didn't have much production because the quarterback play was just so horrid. And it caused this team to really stumble. That's the biggest, misconception between us right here now, Nick, is the expectation from injuries. I think these guys are going to put about 35 points per game. That's what they did the 2 years prior before last season. And obviously you're not going to, expect them to do that because of those injuries, Nick. And I think that's certainly something that we're going to have to wait and see how that plays out. But that's your biggest reason for why the Utes don't accomplish much in their first year.
Everything at the top of this conference seems to be all mixed up. You really have, 6 teams here at the top of the list that could all be in contention for the conference title game. You picked two different teams than I picked. A lot of the other conferences that we're going to preview here, pretty consensus on at least one of the teams making it. You and I have 2 different teams for that. So 4 total different teams out of these 6 making the conference title game. That's the biggest concern with Utah, right, is the injuries. I think that coming back from a torn ACL, Cam Rising, what is he going to look like? What can you expect? This team last year had a lot of high expectations despite potential injury concerns, and they were very poor on offense. That offense had no pulse at all. Yes, the defense is very strong, and I expect the defense to have an equally strong season, but the offensive woes really worried me. And this is a team that lacks depth. If those injuries show up again this year, and I think with the history that some of these players have, looking at Cooley, looking at Rising, you would have to think that, it's sad to say, but you have to think the injuries are certainly going to be a main factor potentially. That's what's factoring in my decision here. I think some of these tougher games down the line, they're going to struggle with a weaker team, and an offense is going to struggle to put points up. I just can't put my confidence in a team that is so injury riddled and lacks that depth to fill in and step up when those players do potentially get injured. That's why I'm going to be cautious here. Pick them to get 8 wins. They'll be in the hunt, but I just think they won't have enough to get over the top.
I have the Utes losing the season finale in Orlando to UCF, but getting retaliation in the conference title game over the Knights. UCF, a team I'm very high on. Obviously, you see with KJ Jefferson winning Conference Player of the Year. I think they have so much versatility. They're already great at running the ball last year, and they returned Johnny Richardson and RJ Harvey, and they had a guy who was very productive last year from Toledo in Penny Boone, and you return a good receiver in Kobe Hudson, also another Gus Malzahn transfer. They bring in Javaris Johnson, who previously was at Auburn. So, there's a lot of familiarity here. Jefferson seems to be a great scheme fit. Love the backfield. This offense is absolutely going to boom this year. And obviously the run defense will need to step up for them to accomplish some goals. And I think getting back guys like Malachi Lawrence, Lee Hunter, overall pretty veteran-led defensive line, it's going to be big for them. I think the secondary is pretty capable as well as making some plays. Certainly certainly worried about what they have in the middle of their defense at linebacker. I think that's a big issue for them. But overall, I think this is just going to be an offense that's going to be able to run through this conference, Nick. They're going to be able to put up, 40-plus points per game probably. Lofty goals, right? But the balance is going to be there nonetheless. I see this team accomplishing a lot. I don't see too many teams that will just absolutely bludgeon them by any means. So I think UCF here, Malzahn has it all primed and ready to win the conference, and I think they'll certainly be able to do so, punching their ticket to Jerry's world.
A team I have very close to getting the conference title game. I'm all over this UCF team, and KJ Jefferson is going to have the same impact that you do. Going to absolutely jump into this offense and light it up. A really potentially high-flying offense here that has a lot of strong star power for this team. And Gus Malzahn's an offensive genius. We saw what he do it with Cam Newton back in the day at Auburn, and I think he can certainly find a way to get KJ Jefferson to a similar level. Obviously not the same level, but I think he can get him to have a very strong season. RJ Harvey, Xavier Townsend, Kobe Hudson, Trent Whitmore are all incredible players in this offense that I think can all have big impacts early on. Penny Boone behind them. Penny Boone, I loved him. I think he's an incredible player coming over from the MAC that can really add a lot to this offense with RJ Harvey. A nice 1-2 punch there. I think Malzahn's coaching is going to really work in favor of this team, drawing up an incredibly authentic and very powerful offense to be able to attack you on the ground, through the air, and find different ways. KJ Jefferson played in the SEC for a couple of years at Arkansas. He's got real SEC football experience as a starting quarterback, and really a productive starting quarterback at that. So I think this will translate well for him to the Big 12. I'm very high on this team. The Knights seems to be a lot of fun to watch this year. If you have some time on your Saturday, certainly sit down and watch this high-flying offense, expecting big things out of them this year.
Now you look at the team right behind them in Kansas State. A team I think can go 12-0, quite frankly. This is a team that's very good. Avery Johnson, we've broke him down plenty of times, so we're not going to waste too much time on it, but we think he's going to be a breakout star at the end of the day. I alluded to Edwards and Giddens. These guys are going to be great at running the football. I obviously replaced 2 key guys on the left side of their offensive line. That's going to be something to monitor. That can certainly maybe slow them down. Overall, they have a lot of young players like Garrett Oakley and Jace Brown on offense, with the aforementioned Johnson, who is a true sophomore. So there's a lot of promise here, a lot of upside overall for the Wildcats offense. The defensive side of the ball, I just think they're a little bit too weak on the defensive line. I think at linebacker, they have a pretty underrated group led by Desmond Purnell and Austin Moore. I think the secondary should be one of the better ones in the country, though. VJ Payne and Jacob Parrish being the standouts there. I think Kansas State's a great team, Nick, and you'd have to go look. I don't have the schedule pulled up right now, so I can't remember. I do have them losing on the road to Colorado in an upset. This is a team, though, that, again, I think can easily win the conference and go undefeated. But I'm going to go ahead and just stick with 9-3 for now, because I definitely think this defense will be good, not great. And even though Avery Johnson's going to be a star, at times on the road in this conference, it's not always going to be easy. And maybe the run game doesn't show up on a night or two. And maybe the run defense doesn't always show up, because at the end of the year, they got absolutely annihilated by Iowa State. And those things seem to happen here in Chris Kleiman's program. So that has me weary to just pick the Wildcats to go off this year. I think they certainly can, though.
This is a team I have winning the conference here. I'm all in on Kansas State. I think it's a team that's going to be extremely exciting to watch. Another really strong offense in this conference. I'm big on Avery Johnson. He looked really good last year. I thought he was a really exciting player. I thought he had a lot to give early on, and now he plugs in perfectly. I think he'd be a really great fit for this offense. A guy that's young, full of power, a really incredible runner, a nice arm as well, very solid in the pocket. DJ Giddens behind him, and Dylan Edwards, a really nice 1-2 punch. Edwards, a fantastic add who can really add a lot for this offense, a very talented runner. Keegan Johnson, Jace Brown are solid wide receivers. The biggest issue for me in this offense is wide receiver depth is weak. If have some issues early on, some injuries, or just players dropping balls, you could find themselves struggling on offense because they don't have the wide receiver depth. They didn't really go out and address that in the portal, even though they did on Dante Cephas. So I think it was a good add. Outside of Cephas, though, you wanted to see them make another add or two. The defense, there are a little bit of concerns here and there, but I do think this is a unit that's solid. That they have to find a way to be strong against the run, which I think is the biggest concern for me. I think this offense will be able to outscore a lot of teams. I think this team will play with a fun pace. That crowd down there in Manhattan is going to be very loud, tough place to play. I've seen a lot of big teams lose there in the past. Oklahoma lost there a few times in the past under Lincoln Riley. I'm all in on this Kansas State team. This team's going to make a run for the playoff this year and be a really strong contender from the Big 12. I really like what they have down there in Manhattan.
Looking at a team right behind them at 8-4 in Arizona. A team that's getting a lot of hype. A lot of people think that they can win the conference. I think that's certainly plausible to do so. But I want to pull people back down to earth a little bit because I think this team, they're kind of in some hurt when they lost their head coach, Jed Fish. That certainly wasn't great. They were able to retain Noah Fafita and Taroa McMillan. They added Ja'Cory Merritt recently in the portal. He's going to be a great back for them. I think Jonas Salvina, a guy that we have making the first team all-conference. The offense is going to be great, right? And the defense last year certainly heavily exceeded my expectations, but the entire defensive line is loaded with transfers. They only have one good linebacker in Jacob Manu. I think it's going to be great for them. In the secondary, they get some veterans back as well. I think it's going to be the strongest positional group probably on this football team. But I think this defense might have more issues this year as Johnny Nanson's not scheming up things this year. Where last year, he gave a lot of great elite quarterbacks headaches with his scheme where they would sometimes drop 8, maybe even 9 guys in coverage. I think 9's a little over-exaggerated, but they would do that often. 7 or 8 guys, Nick, in the coverage. It would certainly hurt opponents because they would also be able to slow down the run. And this year, they don't have those seam guys up front in that front 4 to be able to do that. And I think Arizona, they're certainly having more problems on defense this year. I don't think it's going to be a clean sweep for this offense either, even though I do think Fafita McMillan will be incredibly electric. I think with Dino Babers now as OC, they're going to air it out a good bit. But I don't really think this is a team that's probably going to compete for CFP honors, Nick. I just don't think the defense will be able to do it. I think the balance will probably be a little bit less than it was last year. Is also scheming played a big part into why they were able to, have timely, good runs and that effective balance.
Certainly replacing a head coach that late in the cycle is a tough thing to do. They plug in their new head coach here who, Brett Brennan's not a bad coach, but he wasn't fantastic at San Jose State. And when you're in that part of the cycle, it's really tough to find a quality head coach. Dino Babers at offensive coordinator is interesting. I'm starting to keep an eye on that. The defense is where I'm really concerned. You alluded to it. The entire defensive line is all transfers. That's extremely concerning for me. I do not like that at all. And then when you look at the linebacking core, Jacob Manu is a fantastic player, but Justin Flo, is he going to finally live up to the potential he had? Is he going to live up to that billing? I just don't think so. I don't trust him at this moment in time. Tay Brown further down the depth chart as well. Is he going to be able to step up as a true sophomore with Manu? I just worry about that linebacking core having the additional support. The secondary, I think, is solid enough. We'll get them by. In the offense, obviously Noah Fafita is a fantastic player, and then McMillan is an incredible wide receiver. But outside of that, I worry about the run game with, transfers here. Besides Rashawn Luke, who comes back, is Luke going to be able to be a number 1 back potentially? I don't really know what to expect there. The offensive line, I have some concerns. Tight end as well. Not too sure what that's going to look like. So I think this is a team that has a lot of question marks. They're a very intriguing team. Certainly a team you want to check out. But I think there's too many question marks for me and for yourself over there to really consider them as a contenders moment in time. I think, if they hadn't lost their head coach, they would certainly be contenders in this conference, in my opinion, and be potentially my pick to win the conference. But with the way that things have kind of shaken out, they lost their head coach and had to really replug and rebuild that whole defensive line. I'm concerned. I think they'll be a really strong team, just not going to quite get strong enough to get over that hump.
Yeah, that's something else I forgot to note is that Brennan being the head coach now kind of worries me because this is a big bump up from San Jose State where he really wasn't all that great. It was a bit of a desperation hire late in the cycle. What can you do? It's kind of just who pops up on our list first, who's available, and that's kind of what they got here. They basically play 10 conference games. Not actually. They still only have 9 that count. That road game early on in the year at Kansas State, non-conference game. That's going to be a tough game that I have them losing in. And then they play Utah, 2 weeks later on the road as well. So it's going to be a tough start to the season, and I think that's just going to lead to not the right momentum you want. Last year they had great momentum. with a phenomenal win streak to round out the season. Looking at West Virginia, obviously this is the team that you have being the big sleeper here in this conference, Nick, and for a good reason. Garrett Green is phenomenal. They had a couple of freshman receivers last year break out. They had a freshman running back at the end of the year completely tear up the world, and Jaheim White mixed in with C.J. Donaldson. We alluded to Millum up front at left tackle for what's going to be a pretty sound offensive line, one of the nation's better ones, top 10, top 15 easily. And then obviously the defense, they just need to play at a competitive level. And that's certainly where I want to hold up theirs, because I think in the middle they're not all that great. They're incredibly young. The deep line, they get a guy back like Sean Martin, Tyron Bradley, some veterans, but overall, I don't know how many guys will be difference makers. The secondary is made up of a ton of transfers, including, not including Avery Burks, who's the one returner who's very good in the secondary. Too many question marks, I think, with this defense, and though the offense was good last year, and I think Green will take great steps as a passer this season, you got to have somewhat of a competitive defense, and I guess some people can maybe even try to make that same claim when it comes to UCF. I just don't see the same explosion here, Nick. I don't see the same playmaking from last year's defense. It's going to hold them at 8-4 for me.
This is a team I'm really high on, and this team is very exciting. The defense does concern me, right? There are some holes in the defense. I think the linebacking core is a little bit weak. I think some of the defensive line issues could be there. I think the secondary has some solid pieces. But I think this is all offense here. This is a team that's really going to go out and blitz teams. I love what they have. I think Garrett Green's an incredibly fun quarterback to watch, a guy that's super exciting. Potentially, if you want to reach Heisman player, if you want to throw some money on a guy that's really farther down the list, I think Green's a guy you can throw some money on and just see what happens with it. He's a really fun player. Jaheim White really broke out last year as a true freshman. He's a guy that's returning. That's super exciting and fun to watch. Plus, C.J. Donaldson, a known quantity in college football at this moment in time, is really talented. This team was extremely efficient at running the ball, which I think they'll continue to do so this year behind a very strong offensive line with a bookend left tackle who will surely be a first-round draft pick come next April. Hudson Clement, Preston Fox are two really exciting wide receivers they return as well. The defensive line has some nice pieces. I think Sean Martin, if he steps up, that's a solid piece to have. The linebacking core I worry about. Then Audrey Burks as well is a fun player in the secondary who I think will have a really strong season. I'm high on the Mountaineers. They have a schedule that's not too difficult. They play Penn State week 1 at home. That's a very interesting game. They also play Pitt in that rivalry game when they'll be able to dominate the Panthers, who are really kind of finding themselves in a tough spot. I like this West Virginia team a lot. I'm really excited on them. I think they'll be just there, right behind the two teams I picked, Kansas State and Oklahoma State. This is a team certainly keep your eye on. If they can beat Penn State week 1, get some momentum going, this could be a very fun and very successful team this year.
Now looking at also at 8-4 Oklahoma State, a team that that's pretty ridiculous what they have. Nothing but super seniors on the O-line, super senior at quarterback. Ollie Gordon's coming off a 2,000-yard season. Senior wide receivers in Rashad Owens and Brennan Presley, who are very good football players, and then you have Deshaun Stribling in there, who's your breakout player of the year. Sky seems to be the limit with this offense. I'm feeling vintage Gundy here. Bowman last year played very sloppy football, and that was kind of the theme of their losses. The defense would also be sloppy. Bowman would have a lot of interceptions. I think as a veteran, he hadn't been on the field for a couple of years. I think he's certainly going to get back into the, twitch of things a little bit more after, only a 61% comp rate and those 14 picks. I think this Oklahoma State offense is great, Nick, and I certainly think that Gundy has a team here that can lead them to the college football playoff. I certainly think, again, though, that sloppiness will cost them a couple of games here. I think the defense, and, they got Nicholas Martin, Colin Oliver. Other than that, who are you really going to point to? Maybe a young guy in Cameron Epps in the secondary. The secondary that was incredibly poor last season. The defensive line, they didn't really make many improvements. So, they're going to really be counting on veteran leadership in this defense to really improve. And I think they will across the board, but to what degree probably won't be enough to win this conference. And this is what's fun in the Big 12, Nick. We have all these teams with pretty much identical records, and they'll probably end up like this, where they're just beating up on each other. But there's teams like Oklahoma State that can also go undefeated and shock the world. And I wouldn't be stunned one bit if Gundy was able to do that, because this offense can.
This is a team that's fantastic, great coaching, great offense, which, again, another team that has a high-flying offense, a lot of really strong offenses in this conference. Ollie Gordon, he's a fantastic player, one of the best players in the nation at running back. I do think he'll see a dip this year, but still, pencil him in for, 1,600 yards of total offense, potentially 1,700 yards of total offense. Good numbers. Alan Bowman, a great veteran player who's comfortable in the pocket. I think he'll be really solid. Then Deshaun Stribling, a player that I think will be a breakout player this year. Rashad Owens, Brennan Presley are two really strong wide receivers round out that group. A great veteran offensive line that's a very strong unit. The defense has some weaknesses, but I think Colin Oliver is a really strong linebacker. Cameron Eaps, a fantastic player in the secondary. Corey Black as well, a really good veteran cornerback that could lead this team. Justin Wright, a nice player that transferred over in the past. Colin Clay. I can go on and on. Some solid pieces in this defense as well that I think will keep up to date. This is a team I think is really strong, really fun team. Gundy got this team to the Big 12 title game last year. I think they return this year again, find themselves with a better matchup than they had against Texas last year, but will fall just short to the Wildcats, who I'm really high on. These 6 teams are all really good. They're all going to be battling each other, punching each other back and forth to decide who gets to go to the conference title game. I like all 6 of these teams. I think they're all very fun teams to watch this year, teams to keep an eye on. It's going to be a very interesting race come the end of the season.
Now moving to the bottom portion of our standings, a lot of 8-4s here as well. Plenty of teams we see making bowl games also. I think Cincinnati is going to have a breakout year this season after successfully predicting their under last year. I think, getting Brendan Sorsby at quarterback is going to be helpful for them. I think the offensive line will be great. Corey Kenner, the offense was pretty good last year. They just struggled so bad in the red zone. I think the defense is certainly in for improvements, led by first-teamer Dante Corleone. Team I really want to key on here is the Cyclones, Nick. I think this is a team that returns, 17 starters that Matt Campbell's incredibly happy with, and I think they have so many underrated pieces all across the board. Rocco Beekt, Abu Sama, Jaden Higgins on offense. These are all really good players. I think are going to have big-time seasons. Jalen Knowles back at wide receiver as well. So the growth is going to be big for this offense. The defense as well. A part that gets back 9 starters. D-line gets back some key components. They have a guy in Caleb Bacon who really emerged in the linebacking room. He's got some veterans around him that are certainly going to improve. And I think the secondary is one of the top 10 nationally, led by a guy I talked about in Miles Purchase. Bayou Freiler is phenomenal. Jeremiah Cooper was elite with 5 picks and 10 pass breakups last year. We always talk about how growth and aims is the name of the game for Matt Campbell and crew, Nick, and this team right here screams nothing but that. And I think that's what makes them incredibly scary. That leads them to be my sleeper in this conference. I still have them at 8-4. I think at the end of the day, they'll probably end up with 9 or 10 wins. This is a dangerous team, though. Anything less than that would certainly be disappointing.
Certainly a team you want to keep on. I think their quarterback is really strong. Rocco Beach is a really good player who looked really strong and solid last year. I think the offense has some other solid pieces, some nice wide receiver players on the list. The depth's a little bit weak, but I do think they're a team that's fun. A good offensive line as well. The defense has some really strong pieces in the secondary, nice linebacking core as well, plus some good defensive line play. You don't really want to play in Ames. Ames is a very tough place to play when this team is good. That place is absolutely rocking, and I think what they have under Matt Campbell, he's built a sustained team that's really able to find nice success out there with the talent that they really bring in. They bring in a lot of 3 stars, 2 stars, guys like that, low end 4 stars potentially. That that he develops talent. They get the best out of their players. They're able to recruit guys that are committing to the program, that want to go build part of the culture. I like what they've done in Ames, and his Iowa State team is fun to watch. Certainly, I think they're a sleeper team you want to keep your eye on, and one of these teams that you really got to keep an eye on if you're a fan of some of the other teams in the conference. They could definitely catch you off guard. This team could find their way into the conference title game with the way that this roster is set up. I'm very excited to see what the team looks like. I'm high on the Iowa State Cyclones.
And a team, obviously, we have to talk about the Deion Sanders-led Colorado Buffaloes, a team that last year started off the year hot, and then reality started to set in for the Buffaloes. They played a lot of close games. They played a lot of hard football against some very good teams, especially late in the year, even though they did get absolutely blown out against Washington State. Blew a major lead against Stanford on a late Friday night. So there were certainly plenty of hiccups for this team that they just don't want to talk about and just forget. This team has a lot of hype. Shedeur Sanders, obviously, is going to be a high-end NFL draft prospect. We already knew that, though. The receiving group, I think, is one of the nation's best. They added LeJontay Wester, Will Shepard, alongside Jimmy Horde and Travis Hunter. I mean, these are great players. The offensive line is destined for improvement with a lot of transfers they added. And then, of course, a 5-star left tackle in Jordan Seaton. It's really hard to get a read on this team because they were just so poor in the trenches last year. They've made some big-time improvements, I would say, in terms of, players, especially on the D-line. Davon Hayes, Chidozie Nwankwo, BJ Green, Samson Unkaloa. I mean, those are some pretty good players, Nick. I think are impressive that they added. Middle of the defense, though, at linebacker, still kind of weak. The secondary last year allowed way too much space due to scheming, even though they have good players. Shiloh being one of them. Cremon, Selma, and Craig as well. So it's really hard to get a read on Colorado. I don't want to pick them to win 4 games because I don't see how they can just replicate what they did last year because they did play bad ball and they still played a lot of teams very close, Nick. So I think coming into this year, though, 5-7 is a pretty reasonable mark. They can probably hit 6 wins as well. What are they going to do in the trenches, though, is ultimately going to dictate what this team does. And if they can actually focus on football this year and not so much the Hollywood lights, I think they can certainly accomplish some better things. But they need to come down to light a little bit, and I think Colorado can certainly accomplish, impressive accomplishments this season. Where do you stand on the Buffaloes, Nick? Obviously, controversial topic. A lot of people are, being just ridiculous and saying they're going to win, 9, 10 games. That team's not going to be this good, though.
Love them or hate them, this is a team you want to talk about. Colorado or must-see attraction. Everyone tuned in at some point last year. The show goes on up there in Boulder, an absolute crazy show. What started off with a great start to the season, absolute roller coaster ride, then a complete collapse in the second half of the season. I think this team's going to struggle this year. I am at 4-8. I think this is a team that's going to continue to fall down back to earth. Yes, there are incredible players, incredible pieces. Sanders at quarterback's a fun, must-watch guy, a really strong player, but his completion percentage thing, the whole sack thing, that definitely seems to worry me about his future at the next level as well. Tends to take a lot of sacks while avoiding throwaways to keep his completion percentage high. I do think, Travis Hunter is one of the best players to watch in college football. I love him in defense. He's an incredibly strong defensive player. I like what they have at wide receiver. I think Will Shepard's going to have a fantastic season for this team. The coaching changes worry me at coordinator, specifically offense and defensive coordinator. I don't really see the vision with both hires. I thought that both coordinators they had last year were not bad, but obviously Deion wants what Deion wants. He got his way and ends up with two new coordinators here who I don't really trust either of them. I think they both have good NFL experience, but I don't know how it's going to translate to the college game at all. I definitely worry about that. I think this team could find themselves potentially in jeopardy against North Dakota State on week 1 on that Thursday night up there in Boulder, which is a very good, obviously, historically strong FCS team that comes into town with a point to prove and wanting to make a national name for themselves more than they already do have at this point in time. I worry about the defense. I worry about the offensive line, which I know got a little bit better this year. They added some stronger pieces, but I'm still worried about that O-line, and I'm still worried about the running game, which was absolutely abysmal last year, did not really exist at all, and then Dylan Edwards left the program, seemingly a weird end for him and his time in Boulder. This is a team that you're certainly going to want to watch, right? You can't take your eyes off them, but I'm not really sure what they're going to look like this year. I'm just not optimistic. I think they're going to have 4 wins again this year, and some questions are going to have to start to be asked about what's going on up there.
Yeah, and touching on some other teams, you have the Kansas Jayhawks who return their top 3 receivers, top 3 running backs. Jalen Daniels is back, a guy who a lot of people aren't aware hasn't really played that much in his career, and when he has, he's been good, but health has been a problem for him, so a lot of people are certainly jumping the gun on Daniels. Kansas, though, I certainly think the defense will still be a little bit too weak to really, accomplish more this year. Do have a great cornerback duo with Mello Dotson and Kobe Bryant, though. TCU with Josh Hoover at quarterback and, a pretty deep supporting cast. I think Hoover's going to be a phenomenal player this year. A lot of people are looking at Waco to see if Dave Aranda is just going to, fold over, or he's going to be able to coach up this defense to the level he's accustomed to doing so. They also have DeQuan Finn coming back, or transferring over from Toledo, that is, to be the quarterback. So, a lot going on with Baylor as well, where they could probably come out of nowhere and sneak up on you. Arizona State looking to be a bottom feeder this year, even though they had, again, a lot of portal transfers to continue to turn over that roster. Want to see how Sam Levitt does with, Cameron Scadaboo, who's a pretty good running back. BYU at 4, and I think they're just going to regress big time this year. Houston 3-9 with their new head coach and Willie Fritz. Who really else stands out to you, Nick? You have the floor. Just talk about whatever on this page.
I think there's some teams here certainly want to take a look at. Cincinnati's a fun team. I know you touched them. Texas Tech, they're a team that's very interesting down there. I think Joey McGuire is building a program, landed a 5-star receiver, a really high-end 5-star receiver, beat out a lot of other strong programs that state, Texas and Texas A&M for his signature, a guy that they can plug in early on and get him a ton of targets. I think he was promised, a lot of targets early on. Micah Hudson is a really strong, incredible player that this team adds. I'd like to see what he can look like. Arizona State, I know we have them at 3-9, but they're still a team I think that's interesting. I like what they're doing with their coaching staff, like what they're doing in the portal as well. Some of their recruiting is solid as well out there in the desert. Really curious to see what goes on in Tucson. TCU, Sonny Dykes is still a great coach. I still love watching Sonny Dykes coach. I like watching his teams. I worry about what that quarterback play is going to look like. I worry about what that offense is going to look like, but I think that's a team you certainly want to keep an eye on because they do have a strong system and they have been known to elevate with some poor players in the past. The bottom of this conference is very weak in my opinion, right? Arizona State, Colorado, BYU, Houston are all very weak teams, plus those middle of the pack teams in Tech, TCU, and Baylor. So this is a very, top-heavy conference, in my opinion, with teams that are really strong and going to beat up on each other, and the teams at the bottom are really going to be kind of just fighting it out at the bottom for those bottom spots, trying to hopefully get to bowl games. We have Baylor, TCU, and Tech most likely making bowl games at 6-6. Colorado not that far off at 5-7. Overall, this conference is a very interesting conference. A lot of different teams here with the addition of a bunch of new teams this year. This conference got a new look. Losing Texas and Oklahoma, who were always the strongest 2 teams in the conference pretty much. You lose those 2 teams, you replace with a bunch of different teams. It's very intriguing to see how this conference is going to shake out over the next 5-10 years.
Very interesting Big 12. It is incredibly wide open, even though we have our certain conference championship predictions. Obviously, it can be completely different, and none of those 4 teams could be even in it, Nick. I think that's how wide open it is. It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, appreciate you joining me. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I think this will be a fun conference to watch all year long. There's going to be plenty of excitement, plenty of big moments, plenty of high-end production. All of that is going to be in store this year. As always, Nick, thank you.
Looking forward to seeing what this conference looks like. Some new members, some new teams, a whole total relook. Gonna be a lot of fun to watch this conference on Saturdays.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.